All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Dr. Erin Skiffer, and I'm here with my colleague, Dr. Nick Chu.
Hi.
We're the co-directors of Bay Area Mental Health Collaborative. You'll see on the bottom of our screen there that you have our website if you want to learn more information about us or our practice. We figure we want to just keep it kind of short and sweet. I know a lot of people are finding it hard to juggle everything right now, parenting, teaching, and your own jobs. So just trying to keep the time down and make this the most helpful that we can today. So today we're going to be talking about the co-parenting in quarantine issues that people are facing, and we're really focusing specifically on supporting two household families. So co-parenting obviously is happening in a single household, but across household is, I think, also a particular challenge right now. And so that's really what we're going to emphasize today. Okay. So
And we're going to be talking particularly about sort of middle school age kids and kids younger than that. And just like you guys, we've been sort of scraping together time to work on this as we can. So we're going to keep it pretty casual and just talk through these slides and our thoughts about them. Um, and and so we're starting off with sort of this idea that there's really no one right way to do this. If you're a two household family, there's there. Erin, you said that you sort of you looked. There's no real guidelines about how to do this. There's just these different ideas people have been trying out.
yeah, exactly. And people are all doing it just a variety of different ways with no real right or wrong about it, just whatever works for your family.
Yeah. So always, when it comes to making any kind of changes to custody arrangements, there may be legal issues to consider. You might want to consult your lawyer. There might be agreements that we are not experts when it comes to knowing like when they can be changed. But of course, um, these are unusual circumstances, and things that some people have been doing are extending the stay with one parent to be longer than it typically is. Maybe some families, especially perhaps if they're recently separated, moving back in together, keeping the child in one home for the duration of the quarantine. These are all major changes and what could work for some families and not work for others, but there's some examples of what people have been
I think our point today is that, no matter how you decide to do this, you're really needing to revisit these conversations around co-parenting across households, or what that might look like if you're co-parenting in the same household when maybe you haven't been doing that for a while. So no matter how you guys decide to do it, be sure to be talking about it and to be having these conversations as the information evolves. You might have to have evolving conversations around all of this stuff.
doing. Yeah. So this is the agenda for the talk today. We thought it'd be helpful to give you a sense of, looking at this agenda, a sense of whether what's in here could be helpful for you. Anything in particular you want to point out from here, Erin?
Yeah, just that again, we're not going to be giving any sort of kind of like huge light bulb type of therapeutic advice here, but really just trying to give some space for families to remind themselves around, what are the helpful things that you've been doing, and how might those things need to be amplified or adjusted, and taking into account how the emotions and the ways of creating cohesion in this time across two households is probably different from maybe your friends who are just in a single household for their family. And so we'll need to, a lot of talking that needs to happen. Of course, there's a lot of communicating that gets disrupted because of emotions. And so talking about not only management of emotions, but also how you're communicating and thoughts you might need to be having around what's happening after all of this.
Yeah.
So let's just review a bit about the impact of divorce or parenting apart on kids. So most of you probably already heard about this or researched this when you were first making this decision to separate or divorce, and obviously worrying a lot about your kids and how they're going to handle this adjustment and this new way of being a family. And the research consistently shows that whether in the same household or across households, co-parents who are demonstrating high conflict in front of their kids, really that is the one reason why there's going to be a big impact on kids. So it really does behoove you to revisit what are the different strategies that you can do to be able to effectively and calmly co-parent with your partner in this time in particular. So, one big emphasis is not disparaging the other parent either to the child or in front of that child. So, speaking either kindly or not speaking at all, of course, about that other parent if you're having a hard time and, feeling upset, just keeping that to yourself. And then a big recommendation often is not to involve the kids in the decision making. And there may be times when it would be appropriate to have some input from your kiddos around different decisions, either within the household or across households. But ultimately, that's a big burden for a child to carry if you're trying to make decisions across households and you're asking that child to make a decision that they would likely worry is going to cause some trouble either with one parent or the other, or hurt feelings in one direction or the other. And so do your kids a favor by taking that burden off of them and sticking with the co-parents really holding the responsibility for making these decisions. So those top points I've just made are commonly in what's called the 12 commandments of divorce or the 10 commandments of the divorce. You can Google that topic, and if you haven't already, and it goes through quite a variety of different suggestions from lawyers and mental health providers. Seems like kind of a combination of suggestions around what are the best ways to help your child adjust and the things to stay away from. So for example, not sending money or messages through your children as they're going across households, not believing everything that your child says about the other parent or the other household, and really kind of doing your due diligence to check in. So there's a bunch of different suggestions and tips that I would suggest that you take a look at if you have the time.
Nice.
So let's talk specifically about co-parenting in the context of coronavirus, and we'll get more into this a little bit later, but I think just to frame this really is a time where parents are being called to parent in new ways. And of course, that means you as two household families are being, charged with co-parenting across households in new ways. And while that is quite challenging, maybe it's helpful to think about it as an opportunity to create new habits and new ways of communicating with that other household. And of course, risk tolerance across households, or even within the same household, parents really have different levels of risk tolerance, but across households, it can be amplified. And now that you're across households and you are in the context of this coronavirus, risk tolerance again is going to just be amplified. So one parent might feel okay with the child going to the corner store under normal circumstances, and maybe even still in this context, whereas another parent might be very uncomfortable with that and really not be okay with that in this current climate. And so having these conversations that maybe you thought were kind of under the bridge and everybody was operating the way that they were operating, but now you're having to revisit these ideas and having even maybe a greater sense of cohesion across households. And then this last point, feelings are contagious, just like the virus. And so doing what you can in this time to manage those emotions, and we'll talk some more about that right after this, but if you can just have that a bit as a mantra for you, feelings are contagious, just like the virus, maybe that will help to kind of remind you of when you need to check in with yourself about managing your own emotions or helping to support your child in managing their emotions and whatnot.
Yeah, so talking about emotions, there are a lot of different emotions in the stew right now, as there always are. And so there are the emotions that your kids might be experiencing, emotions that you might be experiencing, emotions that your co-parent might be experiencing. And then there's this added piece that everyone's grieving different things right now, grieving a loss of stability, a loss of safety, your kids, whether they would say so or not, may be grieving sort of the lack of structure that school gives them, the lack of being able to socialize in person, and you know, we as adults might be grieving a loss of financial stability, all these different things that can be very stressful, emotional things, and just amp up the intensity of everything a little bit and give us a little bit less sort of personal wiggle room to handle challenges as they come along the way. Um, yeah,
And
were we gonna say
and
something, Aaron?
I would add one more thing about grieving is that, you know, the field of mental health talks a lot about how the grief process is not linear, that everybody grieves in different ways and different phases and timing. And so that kind of again
Mm.
adds to the challenge and the confusion around, you know, figuring out where somebody's at and how they're doing right now.
Yeah, good point. Good point. And then, you know, sort of building off that and the confusing aspect of how these emotions play out, you know, with kids and their emotions, especially younger kids, they may be having lots of big, conflicting, mixed emotions. And the younger they are, the less likely they are to be able to really tell you about them and really you know, just sort of articulate them in a way that is really clear. And instead, it may be their behavior, it may be acting out that shows the sort of emotions and the what they're going through internally. And so just to be aware of that, to that's, you know, that's sort of always the case, but it may be an exaggerated form of that right now. And we as parents may be having our own sort of struggles that we're dealing with that make it harder to deal with the struggles our kids might be dealing with. And you know, the stresses of co-parenting, they may be like everything else, they may be a little bit intensified right now, where everyone is sort of feeling pushed to their limit and feeling like everyone may be feeling like they need a little extra help and feeling like it's a little harder to give other people the extra help that you might be usually able to give them. And so there's just um, a lot of being pulled in different directions.
And you know, along those lines, there's also a lot of opportunity. You know, if you're able to kind of initiate that conversation of, um, wow, you're having a lot of emotions, and let's sit down and kind of sit with those together and help me understand, and checking in, kind of being a bit more of a detective than you maybe normally would have been, because there might be a little bit more probing to do for wondering what's going on for that kiddo, or even, you know, reflecting for yourself what's going on there, and spending a little bit of extra time to sit with that, even if it means putting aside some of the distance learning tasks you're supposed to be facing right now, but really struggling to get through because your kiddo just cannot focus. They're just internally distracted by what they're going through.
Yeah, really good point. So then I think it brings up the idea of just focusing on what you can control. And I think that's always something that I think about a lot with parenting. But when it comes to a situation like this with coronavirus, I think it's especially true because there's this added element of all this stuff that's out of our control. So really, as a parent, I mean, anyone who's had an infant who refuses a bottle, um, you know, or in some other way makes life really difficult for you in that moment, you know that from the very start, you can't control your kids. Really, you can only control yourself. And you know, we need all the same things that kids need and that everyone else needs in order to be able to do our best job that we can to stick to our values, to stick to the acting like the kind of parent we want to act as and the kind of co-parent we would like to be. And so keeping a routine, trying to stay on top of getting an adequate amount of sleep, trying to do within the context of this, you know, odd shelter in place, these odd restrictions, trying to do whatever you can to take care of yourself, whether that's getting outside, getting exercise, taking a moment to have whatever level of peace and quiet you can for a little bit. Those things are really important in giving us the balance that we need to control ourselves, because really controlling ourselves is the best tool that we have to influence our kids. So one tip I would give for setting goals is to not be setting your goals based on did that did that strategy I tried, did it change my kid's behavior? Because all you can really do is come up with a strategy you hope will work and judge yourself on trying to implement it, trying to stick to it, and then the result, you can hope for a certain result, but the actual result's out of your control. So trying to set goals for yourself, like, did I manage to keep my cool despite this really stressful situation? Did I manage to stick to my values and keep the perspective about what is really important in a certain situation? Did I manage to put that kind of actions on my behalf out there into the world that I would hope to put out there? That's really the focus of what you can control always, but especially in a tough moment like this.
And I would add that, you know, doing what you can to find those opportunities to give yourself a pat on the back is even more essential now, because I think I hear a lot of parents talking about how you might be self-critical about how well you're implementing distance learning, or how often you're screaming, or how much screen time is happening, and really right now, just getting by and being able to manage as best you can, whether that means you're working hard not to turn on the TV before noon. Hey, that's just what has to happen sometimes, and to do what you can to not judge yourself for that, because these aren't normal times when you're trying to really stick to maybe standard parenting recommendations. These are you kind of just doing what you can, and doing your best not to get all upset with yourself about however you're handling it.
Yeah, I totally agree. And as always, I think beware of social media because there's a lot of posts out there of parents showing their absolute best homeschooling moment. And it's easy to feel like, oh, is that what everyone's doing all the time? And what am I doing? And that's just background noise that none of us need. And I think I 100% agree. It's all about just getting by.
Mhm. Mhm. So let's talk a little bit more specifically about, what it looks like to be thoughtful in creating cohesion, and what you might want to consider. So, first and foremost in this context, coming up with some agreement or some collaborative discussions on what do your protocols want to look like, and how might they have looked before when you were going across households, and how might those have to change now across households. And I think the best recommendation is to simplify this. Don't make it any more complicated than it already is, and do your research either together or separately, and come up with some standard recommendations that feel like they fit well for your family, and of course implementing them with some flexibility based on your household. So you might have an essential worker in your household, and so you're going to need to follow that set of specific standard recommendations. You might have made some decisions around where and how much time the child or children are spending their time, and so that might shift the way that you implement these recommendations. Or if one parent is maybe an expert in distance learning, or feels more comfortable, that said, that might be too much of a burden for one parent to carry. And so no matter, even if one parent feels completely at a loss how to do that, you're figuring out how to share that burden right now. And then, this next point obviously is a scary one, but I think an essential one for us to be talking about, which is, emergency protocols in the event that um, a parent or a child, somebody in the household is infected or contracts the virus. If you haven't had these conversations ahead of time, that's a really stressful situation, of course. And it is hopefully a worst case scenario that not many of us are going to have to face. But if it is something that you have to face, having talked about it ahead of time might, go a long way to reducing the stress of actually trying to implement a plan in those moments. So you might consider, whether or not a child or children are going to change homes, or if they're going to stay at a home, or maybe, you take a step to have the other parent or some other mutually agreed upon adult come into the household to be able to caretake for the ill child or the ill parent. Whatever you need to do in that emergency situation, have those conversations now, so that you can execute that plan a bit more seamlessly if and when it comes about.
Yeah, it's a really good reminder that so many of these conversations can be tough or stressful to start. But there can be a lot of sense of sort of relief if you have a plan and you know the plan. It can take away a little bit of that sort of feeling of uncertainty about how things might play out.
Mhm. So a little bit about the nitty gritty of these decisions. So So again, you are strongly encouraged to keep these decisions between parents, again with some input from kids when appropriate, but really don't put that burden on your kiddos. Do what you can to make these decisions and collaborate on these decisions together as co-parents, and then share the decisions with the kids. You might decide that there's depending on the age or the developmental stage of your kids, you want to come up with some agreed upon language for how and what you share with the kids. So again, one parent might be comfortable sharing more, the other parent a separate level of comfort, and so having to really agree on what and how you're going to talk about these things with your kids. The day to day, you might have a protocol that you already had in place for pickup and drop off between the homes, but that might need to have some tweaks or adjustments. And some families, again, we're not making any recommendations here, but some families have tried to make adjustments to account for quarantine recommendations. And so, for example, each household going to the grocery store on the same day, so that when you do go to change homes, that you've waited a good amount of time to ensure that each household is clean, or know which household has if anybody's showing signs of symptoms, that has had time to emerge, and you can execute whatever plan you need to at that point. You want to come up with maybe some ideas around what is an appropriate visitor plan, if any at all, of course, and will each household be comfortable with whatever that plan is. And likewise with outside activities. So again, risk tolerance is different, and you might have been comfortable with your middle schooler going to the corner store or the grocery store, or down the street on their own, but maybe you're needing to shift that, and you're both needing to have an agreement on what that looks like. And again, you've probably already been doing these things across households, figuring out ways to keep each other in the loop. And if you haven't, maybe this is a time to revisit the idea of how to make sure everybody's on the same page. And so sharing with the other household, it might be that you want to schedule a daily or every other day or whatever, some sort of regular video chat, either for the kiddo to be able, kid or kids to be able to connect with the other household, or just even as parents. If you're not wanting to do the video for just you as parents, maybe regular email updates can be really helpful, especially for the parent who maybe isn't with the child or children at that time, to just be reassured that they have a pulse of what's going on with their kids while they're away, which is just a much more heightened level of anxiety at this time, to have your kids not in your home. And then sometimes kids, or yeah, even parents sometimes are having a hard time just knowing what to talk about. There's just not a lot going on, right? So it can be hard to figure out how to connect and how to talk about things. And so you might help your child or your children to create some content ahead of time before that call. So for example, writing a story of the day, and then the child can read it aloud, or maybe just simply making a list of the day's events or the upcoming events to be able to prime them for conversation topics. Coming up with a weekly joke or riddle to share across households could be a fun thing to do. Here's a couple of suggestions for card games that might be fun, really for middle schoolers and up. There's a card game called Big Talk and a card game called We're Not Really Strangers. Full disclosure, I haven't seen the We're Not Really Strangers fully yet. I just ordered it. So it might be more for high schoolers. I'm not totally sure, but you can obviously, they're just little cards like this. You can kind of go through and just cherry pick which ones feel like a good question. So so kind of higher level stuff. So for Big Talk, what does success mean to you? That's kind of a bigger question, but I think a middle schooler could certainly engage with that kind of a question. Or what is something new you've tried recently? May or may not be a relevant one for you right now, but just something to kind of help keep conversation going.
Yeah, I know Big Talk well, and I like it a lot. And so then we thought, we've been talking a lot about what kind of things might be good to talk about. And so we thought it would be helpful to just do a refresher on how to talk about those things. And these communication skills are pretty standard. There's nothing about them that is unique to the situation, except to say that this unique situation might make some of these even more important than they usually are. So collaborative problem solving, it's a pretty, self-explanatory idea, but it would there may be a lot of stressful situations that need a solution, that might feel kind of loaded. And so making it a collaborative process to solve them might look like saying, all right, so can we agree that this thing is an issue? And if it is, what are some different solutions we can come up with? Do you have any ideas for how we could solve it? Or saying, I thought about it, I came up with this idea. What do you think? Do you have any additions do you want to make to that? Do you have any other ideas? I think a lot of these, could really be are really helped by having more of like a curious attitude rather than I have the answer. How can I make you agree to that? More like starting with a question and being open to hearing other ideas. And so, along with that, I think it's important that we respect the struggle that we're all going through right now. It's a really unprecedented time for everyone, really. And everyone's trying to adjust to it. Everyone's going to have moments where they adjust successfully, moments where they struggle. And we're all going through it at the same time. And so just keeping that in mind for yourself, to provide compassion for yourself, and then for whoever you're interacting with regularly, to be compassionate towards them and what they're going through, and knowing they may not be at their best all the time.
And I would actually add real quick, the collaborative problem solving, I think, you might have been in this stage where actually you weren't doing so much of this anymore across or between households, but that more recently it becomes more important for you guys to be actually collaborating again around a lot of topics.
Yeah, good point. Good point. And I think to another tool for this process is to work first on describing a problem or concern with respect. So that means without blaming, without assigning responsibility for a problem to a certain person, just to say, okay, this is the situation we're in. It's a problem for this and this reason. Now can we try and figure out what to do about it? And validating other people's feelings and perspectives. And there's a lot of that's sort of an idea, but there's some specific tools for that. So not blaming them, staying away from exaggerating or judging. And judging, that can often be based on sort of mind reading, like thinking that why they're doing a certain thing, or assuming. And it can be best to just back away from that and not assume why someone's doing something. Just notice the actual behavior, and not exaggerating that behavior, meaning trying to stay away from saying you always do this or you never help out with that, because that's a quick way to start an argument, and where someone could say, well, that's not true, sometimes I do, and then right away you're having some sort of argument, instead of saying, I noticed in this situation it would have been more helpful if, or I noticed that in this situation, and goes to the I messages part, I noticed in this situation, I felt a certain way, or I needed help, and sticking to that as a way of expressing how you're experiencing the situation, because really that's the only thing we can really be sure of, is our own experience and how that's affecting us and affecting our ability to do the best job that we can. And then to try and keep things positive, because this may be a time when there's a little bit more of a need to make suggestions, to make to try and lay out a certain way of doing things. Like when you're out in public with your kids, and maybe you may be telling them not to touch certain things, and there may be a lot more no's, a lot more don'ts. And so to try and keep the positivity balanced, really looking for opportunities to say, I would like you to do this, or I like it when you do this, or keeping things in a more positive, with more positive language when possible. And then also staying focused on the present and what you're going through right now. It can always be tempting in situations where there's some sort of conflict to sort of unpack all of the frustrations, all of the resentments that have been building up, and to unload those. And we've all done it, but it never helps the situation. It's more likely to cause more conflict, to make the argument last longer. And so really remembering to try and stay focused on right now, what's the topic we want to talk about right now, what's the issue we want to figure out. And then just some other points about communication. Really, no matter, even if your kids are actually quite young, really assume that they can hear and on some level understand 70% of what you discuss. And so, what that would lead you to do, hopefully, is to try and speak about the other parent as if the child is hearing you talk and saying things that you would easily be able to defend to them. So saying respectful things, to take a break if it's feeling like it's hard to talk about things in a way that's respectful. If your emotions are really high, which of course is going to happen, just to take a break, come back to things. That's also a really good way to model to your kids how to deal with situations like that. Avoid sending angry texts, angry emails. I mean, those things can just pop up on your phone, and your kid, especially now when we're all in such close quarters, be easy for them to see those things. And you want to try and keep your kids as far away from any kind of conflict that you may be having. And then again, keep the conversation present focused and focused on your kids and what's best for them. That's always the end goal and everyone's hope. But just a reminder that that's sort of should be sort of the guiding focus.
And I would just clarify, that number 70%, we just kind of pulled that out of nowhere.
Yeah,
It's not research based, but I have been shocked in my work working with kids, hearing, they are incredibly perceptive, and they really do pick up on a lot and can articulate both stances of both parents. They really can have a pretty sophisticated understanding of the dynamics going on, even when they're not involved and they're just observing, or they're potentially snooping. And some kids even say, like, I snoop and I know that like I hate reading about this or hearing about it, but once I start, I can't really stop because I feel better knowing, but I also feel bad knowing. And so it's a hard position for your kids to be in. So the more, again, just to do them the service of speaking respectfully so that they can hear the best. I would add one last thing that we didn't add on the slides here, and that is, we are not perfect. We all mess up. Even psychologists, don't necessarily do a great job of communicating all the time. And so if you end up kind of unloading in some way or being disrespectful in some way with your co-parent or about your co-parent, that's also an opportunity to teach your child reflection and apologizing and repair. And so you make the effort to connect with your co-parent to repair for whatever conflict has gone awry, and you can share with your kiddo about talking about how you understand your role in that conflict and what you would have done differently if you could have kept your cool. And the opportunity to show your kids about repair is also invaluable.
That's such a good point. I love that you said that. I was reading this list and just thinking, like, oh, are we setting too high an expectation? And I think no. I mean, I think these are sort of the signposts that we're all, everyone tries to stick to. But then of course we can't always stick to them. And I think it's such a good point. It can be such great modeling if you aren't able to be your best self in any one of these areas. It's such a great example to just own that and to reflect on it, and that can be as valuable a lesson as anything else.
So let's talk a little bit about, there's probably lots of thoughts and what ifs going on in your mind and your co-parent's mind about what happens after this. We're going to make these decisions around custody or visitation, or we're going to make, you're going to have these different things happening. And so let's think about some topics that you might really want to be considering and maybe even talking about this early. So if you've made decisions to modify modify the custody agreement or the visitation schedule, there might be, one parent or household who kept the child at their home more often than the other household. And so they're maybe expecting more of a break once this is over, or likewise the household where the kid was not spending as much time is expecting more time, like they're really wanting to get that time back in some way, shape, or form. And so as you make these agreements, you do want to be thinking about and talking about, okay, so how long might this go, and what would it look like afterwards, and can we agree to those things as well. There might be a situation if a child is staying within one home and you're needing to kind of divide and conquer, if it's a blended family, that one child stays at another home kind of for the duration. And so you're going to need to reintroduce, make an effort to really help that child get comfortable again with that other household, either their siblings or their other parent that they haven't been seeing very often or at all. And then of course, this is just an unprecedented financial strain on a lot of households. And so along with your child custody agreements, there's probably a lot of financial connections that you have across households. And so that's going to have to be inevitably conversations that you revisit, and that's hard stuff to do. And so maybe starting to think about that now. Maybe you're not talking about it just yet, but it is something that is probably in everybody's minds. And so coming up with some ideas around that, and knowing that conversation is coming, and preparing for how you might want to have that conversation is something to think about. So here's just a couple of resources that we have. The Co-Parenting Handbook is a great book around parenting apart, by Karen Bonnell. And then, of course, everybody, whether you have co-parents in your household or you're parenting as a single parent, scream-free parenting is something we could all remind ourselves about how to do right now. And then No Drama Discipline is just a good one around how to connect and also set limits with your kiddos in this stressful time where everybody's having a lot of feelings and a lot of challenges. And then the last one there, Practice San Francisco, is a psychotherapy practice in the city. And they have quite a few online programs that you could look into that we thought might be helpful for different families, different topics. I would
Yeah.
also add that, if you did find this helpful today and you have some topics that you would hope that we would kind of create a presentation on like this, we would be more than happy to. We really want to do what we can to support our community and families, and so please do send us an email through our website, and we'd be happy to do what we can to create some more content that feels useful.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Yeah. So yeah, thanks for watching. Hope everyone is doing as well as they can be, staying safe and staying sane.
Yeah. Alrighty. Take care.
Take care.